Hey, thanks everyone for coming here. Okay, the goal for this talk is how do you evolve your code as the business code changes, and using event-driven architecture, so mainly using messages, and using the Saga pattern. I have some assumptions. First is you are using bounded contexts, or you're striving to use bounded contexts in your code. And what's the other thing? So, and your bounded contexts don't have like a hidden big giant database all sharing the same data. Your bounded contexts, or you don't have some kind of backdoor mechanism where your contexts truly are, isolated and have boundaries, etc. And I will be doing some live coding, so pray to the demo gods. I have a backup in case things don't work out. The last time I did a live coding, I remember this thing falling off, and I kind of like coded with one hand holding the mic, but that's not going to happen because I have backup here. Thanks. So to get started, I'm Indu, and I've been working with event-driven architectures for a while. About like 9 or 10 years ago, I started with getting into event-driven architectures. What really got me into thinking about event-driven architectures was I was working at a company. It was a legacy software, and after a certain point, it wouldn't scale. And so the company hired some big shot SOA person, and spent the whole day looking at our architecture, and then said, "Your software is temporally coupled." And that was the first time I'd heard of the word temporal coupling. So I went and looked up and tried to gather more knowledge, and then figured out, if you do typically if you do microservices, or this was even before microservices was the thing, but if you do RPC style communication where you're calling services after services, you could be temporally coupled, so it's a runtime coupling. So then I started trying to figure out, as part of the architecture team, how do I solve this? And that's kind of how I got into event-driven architecture and pub/sub messaging pattern and so on. I now work with particular software as a solution architect. That's my current daytime job. And who here have used nService Bus? Oh, 2. OK. So particular software makes this library or platform called nService Bus. It just helps it's a messaging platform to help your software do event-driven architecture. It's mostly for .NET systems. So let's talk about change. We know that things change, and we have to keep up with change, because the whole point of the business is to be current. And part of that being current is as business tries to bring up new features, new ideas, we as software engineers need to be able to support the business. So what typically happens is when we try to model our systems using a typical data oriented or entity type, where we model everything as objects, and so we kind of fail to model the actual behavior in the process that's going on. But the most important thing for the business is the behavior. So if we fail to model the behavior as we're creating these objects, we kind of lose important things along the way. So because we lose these important things, when business comes back to us and says hey, I want you to change this stuff, it kind of becomes hard, and we're trying to fit things where things don't fit well, and then it leads to more complexity. So the idea of domain-driven design is so that we focus on the most important thing, the actual behavior of the business processes. So your software could be more aligned with the business needs. So that's again, the whole point, our job as software practitioners is to help business. So if we make their life easy, and if we can extend what they're asking for, or help them get into market faster, it's a good loop. And that's kind of where we want to be. So let's talk about business processes. This is a picture of ancient Messene when I was in Greece summer. So this picture, you kind of can tell, this is thousands of years old. This is a structure. This is from the Palace of Agamemnon. And when you're trying to walk in there, you kind of see this is a grave circle. They discovered some really, important artifacts there. But you kind of see how the structure is laid out. There is a sequence of operations, or there's a sequence of circles. So it's kind of easy to see that what the architect of 2,000 years ago had in mind when they created this. But when we're trying to do software, it's kind of hard, and things come in different ways, and we don't know where one thing begins and where one thing ends. So it's kind of like cumbersome and convoluted sometimes. So how do we get started with the business process? So that's kind of where techniques like event storming is extremely helpful. Who here are actively using event storming? Okay, a few hands. That's great. So for those of you who aren't using event storming, I would highly, highly urge you to start using event storming. And it can be kind of chaotic at the beginning when you're trying to use this process, because your goal with event storming is you bring a group of people into the same room. And we know that's kind of hard, trying to get the business people in and trying, for them to actually be in the room with engineers and what are you people trying to do? Model software, why do I need to be here, et cetera, et cetera. But the important goal is to collaborate. Bringing the business people into the same room along with the architects or the leads or whoever is responsible for the software, to have this sort of open conversation, and having a big, large modeling space. Usually walls work great, where you just stick up rolls of paper, and then you start identifying together what the most significant events are in that business process. So you start with Post-its, and everybody puts, both business experts and engineers, they start posting the most important events on that wall in a timeline, left to right. So once you've kind of identified what the most important events are, then you kind of ask yourself, what could have possibly triggered this event? Or how did this event come about? And then, once this event gets published, what happens after? So these are the kind of questions that can lead, good results. And you can use this process to try to understand a brand new business process that business is thinking of. Or you could have existing software, and then you could still do event storming as a way to gain understanding of the system. And this is where I've noticed in the past, where when event storming was done right, or done, I think this was the first time that company had done event storming. So the process initially was a bit chaotic. People were wondering, what am I doing here in this room, et cetera. But then it started going. And the interesting thing that happened was, as the business process was actually laid out with the events and commands and whatever, the domain expert went and said, wait a minute, that shouldn't happen. In this scenario, the software shouldn't do that. And then the architect guy is like, no, that's how the software is behaving right now. And so this sort of interaction where people are trying to collaboratively understand, okay, that behavior is wrong, and the software should behave differently. In fact, should behave in a very specific way. So you kind of gain insights about what this business process should be. So event storming is a great technique. So if you, again, get started, I'm sure if there are any DDD meetups around you, would be a great place to start. I help one of the organizers of DDD in Austin, and we just started it was like a 1-hour session of let's just take this problem and let's just model it. And so you just try to gain understanding, and that can be hugely helpful, especially in a meetup setup. So I want to take an example of American Airlines, because I have my Air Advantage membership card. And when I took this thing, the whole idea was, hey, I'm flying, I want to accumulate miles, so eventually I'll get a free ticket. Yay, hooray. So I signed up. And the process for the membership or loyalty program looked like this. I had to fly 25,000 miles or a certain number of segments. So if I was a person who traveled in the US a lot but short trips, that's fine. I just needed to do 30 segments. Or if I did quite a long trip, as long as I got 25,000 miles, then it's great. I get promoted to gold and so on. So this was their loyalty program. So if we kind of think about, like, OK, how are we going to model this? Probably there's something that's looking at, every time a segment was flown, there's some logic there. And because it's, this loyalty thing knows all about segments, it's great. So it can calculate, OK, here's the number of segments, and this segment had this many miles. So it does this calculation, hooray, we know enough to know that the customer can be promoted to gold and so on. So this is simple enough. But I got an email saying that, hey, we've changed the program. Thank you for being a very loyal Air Advantage member. The new program is I had to spend $3,000 in addition to flying these extra miles. And that's kind of how I lost my gold status. So now the problem becomes interesting. Previously, the segment thing or the loyalty thing that knew all about miles had enough data to decide what it needed to do. Now, there's a new requirement for cost, which is like you have to spend $3,000. So oftentimes, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to need data coming from these different bounded contexts in order to form a business process. So if you have something that's loyalty that knows with miles and things like that, it doesn't know anything, or it shouldn't know anything about reservations, what happened with the customer canceled, or like the details of that, which is in a nice different bounded context. And again, how much the customer paid is in a separate bounded context. But now, in order to promote this customer to gold, we need data from different contexts. And this is kind of where messages can help. And so I use messages as a way of communicating between different bounded contexts. So there's different ways of doing this communication between using messages. One is using commands, and the other is using events. So let's talk about events. Events are messages where you clearly know something significant to the business has happened. And usually, you publish them after the fact. And therefore, they're named in the past tense. And commands are things that are like, in the active tense. And typically, you use events as a mechanism to communicate between different bounded contexts. But you kind of use commands to communicate within the same bounded context. You should never tell another business context what to do. Who here has watched 300? Oh, yes, good. Now you know the story. So what happens when the messenger from Xerxes, goes to the Spartans and says, hey, surrender, and, he gets pushed off into this well, or he gets his head cut off, right? So it doesn't end well. The thing about commands are commands can fail. So that's why you don't tell another bounded context what to do, because they can fail. And but it's a good, useful way of trying to communicate within the same bounded context. So because of the fact that commands can fail, we can think about the constraints. What are the reasons why this command can fail? So you can ask yourself that question, and then you can figure out, okay, there are these certain business rules where, if this fails, you don't know what to do. You're the programmer or the software practitioner, but the business domain expert can tell you when this whatever thing happens, we need to compensate this way, or we need to give the customer some discount or a free upgrade or something. So I'm sure they have they have a use case, or they really know what to do in that scenario. So our job is to find out what these constraints are so we can try to put those in our context. So the other thing about like naming and like using these events is like naming is important. So you have to use the language of the domain in trying to describe these messages. So try to be technology agnostic in trying to name these commands or messages. Like I think when I first started, one of my events was PDF document was generated. Yeah, it was in the past tense, but business knew nothing about like what PDF document I was talking about. It had no meaning to the business. It was an event. It was in the past tense, but it doesn't describe what it means to the domain. So when you name the events, make sure that it carries that business significance in the names. The other thing that I did was, because I'm so used, like the CRUD way of thinking, because we've all dealt with databases, or I have for the most part of my development time. So the easiest events or commands to our brain locks into are things where things are created or updated or deleted, again, like following the CRUD model. Sometimes we come up with names like customer was created, customer was deleted. I mean, we don't delete customers. It's like you are deleted. But we might onboard a customer, or we might I don't know what the term is, but that's our job. We need to find the right term, what the business is calling, like onboard customers, etc. So you can figure out in their names or in the language what they're using to call this, and try to get those names, and then make our messages more meaningful that way. So the other word that can be really helpful to identify the events is the word when. So when you hear the domain experts start using language that contains the word when, that's like an indicator for an event. So for example, when an aircraft type is changed, we need to make sure that the passengers are notified. So in that sentence, they're clearly telling you that aircraft type is changed is a significant event. So the word when can be quite useful in trying to identify these events. So the hard part about identifying events are our brains are so used to with years and years of how we've been so data-centric, to try to move to an event-driven model. Even if we've embraced event-driven model, it's still hard to let go of all those years of modeling with data. So ask yourself, what could be missing here? What am I not seeing here? So that's usually the hard part. And so a business process can be triggered by events coming from different bounded contexts. So in DDD world, it's a conscious decision of what amount of information or data that you want to share in that event that you're publishing. So the whole idea of using messaging is so you make your systems loosely coupled, and because they're loosely coupled, they're reliable and scalable and yada, yada, yada. But if you put a large amount of data in that message, because that message is being shared across different bounded contexts, now you're being coupled effectively using schema. The whole idea was to be loosely coupled, and now you are still coupled because of the amount of data that you share. So it's very important to consciously kind of leak the right amount of information, so to speak, that you want in your events or commands. So the other thing is, so business processes could be you could use messages and events to in two different ways. One is using pub-sub pattern, where you've got these different bounded contexts, all publishing events. And so just by other bounded contexts subscribing to these events forms a natural business process. So it's like a cycle. One event gets published, another bounded context picks up, subscribes to that event, does something, and then publishes another event, which is picked up by another bounded context, and so on. So you could have a business process that's just purely based off this pub-sub model. The other way is there could be multiple messages take part in the same process. So you have the orchestrator type thing. So when I get this event, first I got to do X, Y, and Z things within my own context, and then I'm going to do something and publish an event. So now you have the orchestrator type pattern. So for this talk, I'm just going to talk about sagas and this orchestrator type of pattern. So the saga is a useful messaging pattern, which is useful when you're trying to deal with multiple messages. The thing with business processes are they're stateful. And you need to be aware of like what happened when these messages came in, how, they may be some state that you want to remember. And you want to use that state to trigger your next command or so on. So there's this, there's a state involved. And based on that, you could, take decisions and then trigger other commands. The saga is also useful to take compensating actions. You could do things like, if something didn't, so it's not just events that are happening that you should be interested in. You should also be thinking about events that are not happening. What if, something you're expected to receive an event, but let's say you never received that event. What then? How should your business process react? So you need to think about those cases as well, and that kind of helps you ask these questions to the business and say, hey, how do I, in this scenario, what should I do? And then try to code those aspects. So NService Bus implements Saga pattern in this way. So again, NService Bus is a library which does the heavy lifting. So this is kind of how we implemented the Saga pattern. So what happens is the message comes in, and then there's a Saga instance object that gets created. And then the message gets dispatched to your actual handler, which does like whatever work that, the code that you've written inside the handler. You could remember some state, and you could send some messages out as part of that handler, and then it saves that information into the persistence. So that's what happens when a new saga is created. Now, when another message that's part of the same saga comes in, what first happens is that saga instance that was stored is retrieved, and that object is hydrated with the current state information that was stored from the persistence. So now you have the Saga instance object, and then that message is dispatched to the second handler, which participates in that process. And then it can again do whatever it needs to do. This is where it executes your logic, and by, it could complete the process. If those two events or messages complete the process, it marks it as, okay, this saga is now complete, and then it deletes that instance object that it has. So this is, yes?
One question.
Yes.
There is actually two buses. One where the message comes,
yeah.
and another one where you listen to the saga message themselves. You have two buses. One bus
right.
where saga processor is listening,
right.
and one other where the saga messages are resolved by your.
So so the way this works is like it's like a sleep and wake up type of mechanism. So there is no process manager that's running all the time. So you have, of course you have the service that's running, but it's kind of currently in like a hold state. So when a message comes in, it just creates that whole Saga instance object, brings it in, and then when the second message comes in, it has the right state, and then it can just rehydrate based on the state data, it can, I can show you the code, it'd be easier. So this is kind of how it's implemented in NService Bus. Again, NService Bus is for .NET. You have other messaging systems available for .NET. Mass Transit is also one of the, and they have a similar Saga pattern as well. So again, let's go back to this requirement, and let me show you how. This is where now you can't see me because I'm very short. So I will show you. So this is the code again. This is .NET, C#. So I have this class here, the gold policy, preferred customer gold policy, and it implements the Saga. And there's some little bit of magic here. We can ignore that, but that's kind of how NService Bus ties these different messages as, hey, these belong to the same Saga. So first, let's look at the Saga definition. So this Saga here is dealing with two messages. One is the flight plan being added, and the customer was billed. So it's listening to these two events. So we're saying that either of these can actually start the Saga, which means that any of these two messages can create this Saga instance object, because when we're dealing with messaging, we could deal with like out-of-order scenarios where message order is not guaranteed. Maybe there are some brokers out there who give you ordered or guaranteed ordering, but not all of them do. So when you're designing, it's better to make sure that that messages could arrive out of order. So this is why we're saying that, hey, doesn't matter, either of these can start a Saga. So now when a flight plan's added, can everyone see the code at the back? OK, thanks. So when the new flight plan is added, we store like the customer ID and the total miles flown in this data. This data thing is the state object, which is nothing but like it's just a class. And this is where like you want to kind of remember the different things that you want to pass across these different messages. So going back. So we're saying that, again, like when the customer was billed, we are trying to like add like the dollar amount. And we're checking in each case, saying that like, hey, can we actually promote this customer to gold? And we can if the total miles is like 25,000 and the dollar paid is like 3,000. So if I run this program, Visual Studio has been giving me some weird things where like when I start multiple projects, it tells me it can't start the debugger, so hopefully that doesn't happen. OK, here we go. So this is my first program, where I can just cheat and press F to publish like several flight plans segments. And then I can press B to simulate the billing. So let me go ahead and press 2 flight plans. And we have this visualization tool to kind of look at this, what's happening with the messages. So as you can see here, oh, not that. OK, here we go. Let's try again. OK, so this is so weird. OK, so the first thing message happened, and the miles was 10,000. And then you can see that the second message happened, and the miles got updated from 10,000 to 20,000. And this is the Saga, and these are the incoming messages. And let's see. OK, so now let me go ahead and publish some billing events. We need 3,000, so we probably need 2 more, right? So now again, let's go refresh. And we now see there's like 2 customer build. Again, like now, if I switch to all properties and try to zoom again, you can see that the total miles, I mean, it's still not promoted because the cost-wise has been satisfied, but the miles is still 20,000. So we need like 1 more event for flying. So now, if we go and see, we get the customer was promoted to gold, And when that state, when the final message came in, all the conditions were satisfied. Like now the miles are like, more than 25,000, and dollars is more than whatever 3,000. And so we can see that this event called customer was promoted to gold was published. So switching back. Okay. So this is great, but sometimes we need to have time represented or modeled in our processes, because sometimes what will happen is like if certain events don't occur during the expected time, usually have a compensating action to do. So time needs to be represented or modeled as a durable concept. So so let's say the requirements changed. Yes, the customer was promoted to gold. However, this doesn't really take effect until the next calendar year, right? So yes, so the person's paid all this money, but you can't just like right away give him that gold status or her gold status like on their next flight. It only kicks off like in the next calendar year. So now you have to model that. So modeling time is important, and we can do that as messages. So let me go back. This is where I try to live code. Okay, so let's go to this. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so first we need some kind of, I need to stop debugging. Okay. So first we need some kind of way where we need to model this calendar year thing. So let's call this calendar year has started. Okay, so we have that. Now, previously, we said the saga was complete as soon as the customer was promoted to gold. We can no longer do that. We need to wait now for the requisite amount of time. So we now need to request a timeout. Requesting timeout, like NService Bus like takes care of doing that for you to take your object and create it as a message and send it, and then it can hydrate that message back and send it to you after the time has elapsed. So that's the term there. So we're not going to wait for a whole year. So we will cheat, and we will say, we will wait for, say, 10 seconds. So when this 10 seconds has passed, we want new calendar year has started. And this is all async in .NET, so we need to make sure we please the async gods by calling. I hope they do something. I don't know why like I always have to do configure await false, but I'm sure there's a very good reason for it. Okay, so we've done this. We need to do the same thing in the other case where the customer was billed and previously we were publishing an event or marking the saga as complete. Now we need to go ahead and say, hey, I need to wait for this time for the calendar year to start. Now we need to tell the saga, hey, I want you to handle this timeout message called calendar year has started and write the implementation for that. So in here, let's make this async. And here we can publish an event saying publish gold status activated. And we can say customer ID. And we have the state in our, the customer ID in our state object that we remembered. So we do that. And of course, this is, we need to await. another configure await false. Maybe we write saying like, okay, goal status activated. Okay, so let's see. Build, compile. Hooray, it compiled. I had no compiler errors. Okay, so let's give this a go. Again, it's the same, same thing. I am going to cheat and press 1, 2, 3, and we can go and verify that we've got all these 3 flight plans was added. So now we're satisfied from the miles side, and now we'll go and add 2 more billing events. And now let's go and see. So now, when the final event came, which finally updated the right dollar amount, now we have requested a timeout. So at this point, previously, the saga was marked complete. Now we've requested a timeout. Now we just need to wait for 10 seconds. And hooray! So the framework hydrated that time as a message, and after the time of whatever had elapsed, it sent the saga a message, a timeout message, saying like, hey, this time has elapsed, and that message is also part of the business process. And now, because the time has elapsed, we know that, okay, now the customer is active. So this is kind of how you implement time and in your sagas. So the questions that you kind of need to ask yourself here are, the difficult part here is to tease out those business rules, right? So some are obvious, but some aren't. So what happens if the customer who had enough miles and enough cash had canceled a reservation during that time period? Do we still go ahead and honor that status, or do we downgrade that customer? We as programmers or practitioners can't answer that. That's a question that the business has to answer. So these are the kind of questions you kind of have to ask yourself. Again, like, what happens to existing customers? Like, when the policy got changed from one model to the other, when does this new thing kick off? How does it affect existing platinum customers, or do they still keep it for that grace period because of the policy change or not? We don't know, but the business knows. So these are some of the questions that we have to ask, and these are the hard questions. And asking these hard questions is what will help us to build the software so our stuff can evolve. So again, the easy part here is writing code. The hard part is to get the right people in the room so we can ask these questions. And we are a collection of our biases. And this is where, how we collaborate becomes super important. We have to be compassionate towards one another. We have to be good listeners. And the technique of event storming is largely useful because with event storming, the really cool part is you don't have to wait. Like, if you have an idea in your head that this event is important, you don't have to ask permission from your other person that you're collaborating with. You just write the event on a sticky and go post it on the wall. So you've got your idea out of your head, now it's there. Now, if the other person thinks oh, this event should be called something else, it doesn't matter. They write whatever they think it is and stick it on the wall. And then you can have meaningful conversations. So by effectively collaborating, that's to me the most hard part and where we all can improve. And as, programmers are when we have something in our head, our first thing is to try to get that idea out as soon as possible. And this is where I think that we can all be wait until the other person has actually finished their sentence before interrupting. And just some simple collaborative techniques can help. But these are hugely and largely useful in trying to get the most important bits that need to go into your code. So to me, this is the hard part, and there are several books. There's like a Don Ariely book. What is that? Simply Rational, or I can't remember the name of the book. But basically, like our human mind works. We think we're all rational beings, and we're all like take very logical decisions. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and emotions rule us whether we like to accept it or not. So reading those type of books can help. And I think if we want to be successful in trying to evolve with the business, we need to be good listeners. So that's the gist of the talk. My company has provided this link where you can get access to Udi Dahan's advanced distributed training video course. So if you go to this link, you can access one of his ADSD videos. Thank you so much. Any questions? How much time do I have for questions?
1 minute.
Okay. Questions? Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
I just wanted to know for the saga, for example, the time you're doing here, if you want to monitor like your production, and let's say, okay, in your example, if I take this, we will have like the saga open during, let's say, a few months.
Yes.
Is it not an issue because maybe if there is something wrong just before applying the timeout, the saga will never complete, or it will be resetted, I think, at the end of year, something like this? How do you manage this?
The question was like, in this model, sagas can be open for a long state of time. So if we're waiting for a timeout message and during that time something else has happened, how do we make sure that we stop the saga, or how do we effectively do that? So I think if this is like a decision of like, to ask like, what's that message that's changed, or what's this trigger or input where the original time has changed. So it could be like another message that can that the saga can listen to, and maybe from a support context, or so effectively when you receive that message, you could complete the saga. By completing the saga, like all pending timeouts don't matter because you've effectively cleared your saga instance. But the interesting part to that question is like, what is that message, or what is that action that is going to make this saga like no longer relevant? And so you have to find out what that is, and you have to model that like as a message, but like which context does that belong to? And so you have to drill down a bit deeper.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. More questions?
So I think it's kind of interesting, this question, because it relates to one thing that I wanted to mention. Particularly, like there seems to be dependence between the execution time and the data in terms of, so I was thinking if I, as a customer, fulfill this loyalty policy at that time, that's kind of a contract that I have with the company that is going to be effective as of next year, right? So what if we were to model this, meaning effective as of? So in that case, this data would be there, right? So I'm not sure if there would be a need for running again Saga. So how would this change?
So if I understand the question, let me try to rephrase. So you're saying that like the calendar year has started, that was the example that I gave, but if I...
So the thing is that actually we want to kind of model the fact that customer has been promoted to gold activated as of next year, right? But what if we were to save this data in the event that we generated once the user has fulfilled this condition, right?
Sure. So you're asking why, like, did you model that as a durable time event instead of just saying that, hey, just put this in the event as it starts as of that date?
Because
So,
it correlates to this question, I think, as well.
Right. So yes, you can do that when you have that information, and that's perfectly okay. You're just saying that, hey, this is active as of this date. But sometimes modeling time, I just use this as an example to model time. If you think of like some policies like Expedia, where Expedia allows you to book a flight, and then it gives you 24 hours and for the user to cancel. So with, let's say, the process is like you pay, you actually use your credit card, you pay for the thing, and then you've booked your flight. But then if you can also cancel the flight. So if you did that operation within 24 hours, then you're not charged. So if you want to model something like that, this is just an effective way where you can still use time as a message to kind of like wake you up and tell you what to do. And it's also useful to take compensating actions. Like, what if something doesn't happen? So you're expecting a certain outcome, but you're saying that, like, if this doesn't happen in 24 hours, then I need to do something. I need to take a compensating action. So modeling time as a durable message in those cases are hugely useful as well. Does that answer your question? Thanks.
I don't know if it is maybe the same question.
Okay.
The program, the goal program,
Yes.
is something that you compute over a year. So if someone on 1 year is doing a certain amount of flights, he goes to gold for the next year. But at some point, if he doesn't fly that often, he goes back to the
Right.
normal situation.
Right.
Like he's not in the gold status. So I think each time you have to reconsider the flights that the person took over the year. So it's not a state. It's actually you have to consider all the flights he has done on the year,
Yes.
and then
Yeah,
know if it's-
definitely. So there's definitely multiple events. This is like a super simplified way, so I can just demonstrate this pattern. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Cool. Cool. Any other questions? Thanks.